Is Smriti Mandhana the reason that India do not win any World Cup knockouts?
There are a lot of narratives going around on how Smriti Mandhana struggles to perform under pressure and crumbles, especially in the knockout games when India plays. And also how this is one of the reasons why India go on to lose the knockout matches. Now, before we talk about her stats, how she does in the T20 and the ODI format, and if all of these are actually true, hit the subscribe button.
We're going to get into this video highlighting 3 accusations against Smriti Mandhana and going to break them down one by one and see if these are true in the first place. The first and most common thing that we hear all around the media is that Smriti Mandhana is someone who cannot perform under pressure. This means that she's turning up to knockout games like a semi-final or a final in a World Cup or an important tournament and not being able to deliver for the team with the bat. The first thing we look at is her T20 knockouts and how she's done in these games. Now, these games include all of the knockout matches that she's played in franchise leagues all over the world for her state as well as for Indian cricket. All in all, she's played 20 games where she averages 30 with the bat, which is pretty decent, and she has a strike rate of 123. But from there, when we move to T20 international games alone and the knockouts that she's played in 15 games and her numbers get a little better. She has an average of 32.6 with a strike rate of 129.7, which is actually pretty good for T20 cricket.
But then if you be a little more specific and then talk about T20 World Cup knockout matches, this is where things get a little more interesting. She has an average of just 15 and a strike rate of 130. But then if you compare her to the other batters around her, even if it's slightly the top 5 run scorers in a T20 World Cup knockout game, everyone's done better than her. The likes of Harmanpreet Kaur, Jemimah Rodriguez and Deepti Sharma, they all have better averages than her. The only silver lining is that she does have a strike rate of about 130. But again, it's not good enough because you still only average 15. But again, you have to keep in mind that the sample size of all of these numbers are very, very small. And this trend continues if you look at the top 5 run getters for the Indian team in the T20 World Cups. She again has the worst average in the top 5 run getters. Of course, she has the best strike rate of 114, but this again shows the lack of intent of Indian batters at T20 World Cups. But keep her T20 numbers in mind because this is something we will continue to explore throughout the video.
This being said, it's very easy for people to be nitpicky when it comes to how a person performs in the knockout games. Because for example, in the Commonwealth Games, although Smriti Mandhana struggled in the final against Australia, scoring just 6 runs of 7 balls, that was not the case in the semi-final. In the semi-final, in fact, she turned up and she scored 61 of just 32 deliveries against England, and that's eventually what ensured that India would reach the final in the first place. And on the subject of World Cups, Smriti Mandhana did have a dismal 2024 T20 World Cup that happened in the United Arab Emirates. In the 4 matches she played, she had an average of just 18.7 and she was striking below 100, striking at 94. And this is also where the narrative of Mandhana struggling under pressure gained speed. And I say this because Smriti on either side of the World Cup in 2024 had amazing games for the Indian team in T20 cricket. Before the World Cup, she did really well, averaging 45 at a strike rate of 122 in games in 2024. She also did well in knockouts, getting runs in the Asia Cup knockout games. But not only that, even after having a dismal World Cup, when she was back for the last 3 games of the year, she once again scored runs. Here she averaged 64.3 with a strike rate of 159. And so it begs the question as to what went wrong, particularly only in the World Cup when she was able to score runs through the rest of the year.
Interestingly enough, if you look at what went wrong for Smriti Mandhana in the 2024 World Cup, it was mostly her struggles against the spin bowlers, especially because it was in the UAE. Out of the 4 dismissals in the World Cup, 3 of the dismissals came against the spinners, whereas the 4th one was a run out. Now, if you look at the stat, you'll realize not only does she struggle against subcontinent countries, she also struggles scoring runs in the subcontinent. Now, this has a lot to do with the fact that she is an opener, a kind of batter who likes the ball coming onto the bat, and the second the pitch slows down and a spinner is introduced, it almost seems like she has no idea what to do.
Beyond just the T20 format, if we look at how Smriti Mandhana has done in the ODI format, the sample size is really small. It was only in 2017 where India reached the knockout phase, and there she played a couple of innings, one in the semis and one in the finals. Overall, she got just 6 runs over there, and that really is too small a sample size to judge her for the rest of ODI cricket. And also the fact that in 2017 she did not particularly have a good ODI season where she only averaged 29, which is one of her lower averages if you see her career. And so the conclusion to this point of whether or not Smriti struggles under pressure need not necessarily be true. It's more the case that Smriti struggles against spin, and that is something that was highlighted especially in that 2024 World Cup. So more than the pressure situation that she's a part of, it is the kind of bowlers that she's facing up against, the matchups, and also the conditions that she's playing her cricket in.
The second narrative that is made a lot with Smriti Mandhana is the fact that the Indian team is over-reliant on Smriti Mandhana. Now, to see how impactful Smriti Mandhana's score is on the Indian team and the result, we looked at every time Smriti Mandhana scored 30 and less runs, runs, and India have gone on to win or lose the game. 45% of the time when Smriti Mandhana scored 30 and less runs, India have gone on to lose that game. Whereas India has gone on to win 65% of the game whenever Smriti Mandhana has scored 30 or more runs. And in the ODI format, we saw the impact of her runs in the Indian team every time she scores 50 and less runs, and if India goes on to win or lose that game. India have gone on to lose 49% of the games that Smriti Mandhana has scored 50 or less runs in. Whereas India has won an astonishing 75% of the games whenever Smriti Mandhana has scored 50 or more runs. Of course, this only goes to show that as much as it's a team effort and everything, the amount of runs Smriti Mandhana scores does have an impact on the game itself.
And from here, another thing that we wanted to see is how Smriti Mandhana does on an innings basis, whether she's a better chaser or she's better at setting targets. As you'll see from the numbers that are shown here, both in the case of T20Is as well as in the case of ODIs, Smriti Mandhana is brilliant at chasing down innings. With an average of 42 in T20 internationals while chasing and an average of 69 in the ODI setup, clearly she stands out when it comes to chasing and winning games for India. And naturally, of course, her average is the worst in the case where India's chasing and they go on to lose these games. However, this is something that completely flips over in the case of World Cups. We looked at the last 3 World Cups, specifically speaking the last 2 T20 World Cups and the last ODI World Cup that India played. As you'll see, all of our scores are on display here, and we've highlighted how India has done, whether they've won a match or lost a match, and more importantly, how Smriti Mandhana has fared in first innings compared to second innings. The situation in each of these World Cups is the exact opposite, where Smriti Mandhana has done much better in the first innings, which is also reflective in her averages. Irrespective of the format, Smriti Mandhana has always averaged 50 plus in the games that she's played in these World Cups. Whereas when you come to the second innings, it's a completely different picture. Smriti Mandhana has struggled in the World Cups when it comes to batting in the second innings. In fact, in 2 of these World Cups, she's had single digit averages, and in just 1 World Cup, she has an average of 21.3.
To give you a little more perspective on how Mandhana's runs have contributed to the Indian team, we have looked at the percentage runs contributed by her to the Indian team since her debut. Before we even get into that, you should know that Smriti Mandhana is the highest scorer for the Indian team since her debut in both the formats. Now in the T20 format, 19.5% of all the runs that the Indian team has scored has come from Smriti Mandhana. Whereas this number dips by a little bit, with 17.8% of all total runs scored by the Indian team coming in the ODI format from Smriti Mandhana's bat. And so to conclude this narrative, of course the Indian team is reliant, and if anything, over-reliant on Smriti Mandhana because of one, the position she comes out to bat. She is an opener, so for an opener to give a good start for the team is very, very important. And second, because of the experience that she has and the amount of runs she's already scored for the team. Now, someone like her with all that experience does not get off to a good start and is under pressure and gets out early, it only adds more pressure to the Indian team.
The last narrative that haunts Smriti Mandhana is that she's an inconsistent batter and someone who's a little slow to begin with. And here, obviously, the first thing that we look at is her overall averages in either of the formats. And by looking at these averages, there is no way that anybody can say that Smriti Mandhana is an inconsistent batter. Not only has she been the highest scorer in both formats ever since her debut for the Indian team, but she also has brilliant averages against most teams. And more importantly, she also has good averages when it comes to World Cups. However, when you specifically look at how she's performed in World Cups on an innings by innings basis, you'll see that these averages might be inflated because of certain performances, and if you look into it deeper, you'll see a different story.
If you look at the 2017 ODI World Cup, she gets 2 big scores in the first 2 matches, with scores of 90 against England and 106 against the West Indies, which is a great start to a World Cup campaign. But then if you look at the next 7 games, she has only single digit scores apart from one match where she scores just 13 runs against the New Zealanders. But then when you come to the 2018 T20 World Cup, she of course did get decent scores, nothing out of the ordinary except for one score of 83.
The 2020 T20 World Cup was dismal for her, where she got 4 scores in double digits, but all of them were just in the tens. She got scores of 10, 11, 17 and 11 once again. The 2022 ODI World Cup was once again a very interesting case where she did well. She got off to good starts in a lot of the games, but in only 2 cases was she able to convert these to scores of substantial amount. The first being a 123 versus the West Indies and the other being a 71 versus the South Africans. Despite her being in excellent form in 2022 and also in the World Cup itself, the fact that Smriti Mandhana couldn't convert convert some of these starts into bigger scores is something that was very frustrating, not only for her, but also for us as Indian fans.
In the 2023 T20 World Cup, she did play 4 matches, got 2 scores of 50 plus, but one of it was 87 against the Irelanders and the other was a 50 against England in a losing cause. The problem here is that the other 2 scores of 2 and 10 shows exactly what the problem is, that she fluctuates between a very big score or struggling to reach the double digits. This was also highlighted in the 2024 T20 World Cup, where she just had one good game against Sri Lanka where she scored a 50, and apart from that she struggled to reach even 20. A very interesting but also worrying observation is that if you look at these scores, a lot of these scores are against the weaker teams in the World Cup, and she's usually struggling against the top teams.
And so in conclusion for this point, more than her being a slow batter and someone who is inconsistent, it's in certain situations where she's really struggling. As we pointed out in the World Cup, Smriti Mandhana is someone who comes in with form, gets a good score, but is unable to carry that form through the World Cup. Not only that, it's also clearly evident that Smriti Mandhana is someone that prefers the ball coming onto the bat, something we've also spoken about in detail, and how the conditions play an important part in how she looks at getting scores. For Smriti Mandhana to become a perfect match winner for this Indian team, not only is she going to have to work on her game against spin, especially on the slow pitches, but she's also going to have to tough it out when it comes to batting against the big teams and absorbing that pressure and staying at the crease for long periods of time.
Now this has been a video on Smriti Mandhana and all the narratives around her. If you have enjoyed this video, like, share and subscribe, all that good stuff. All of our links are in the description below. If you haven't followed us on Instagram or Twitter or on WhatsApp, do that too. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.